with perfect diet and training, doing 100 milligrams of test. I also have the exact same thing now for a therapeutic amount of Nandrolone, doing Nandrolone only with exogenous estradiol. I have reference blood work for that, and I can also assess, exactly how much muscle I retain on both the testosterone and the Nandrolone. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do What's up guys, Derek from moreplates.moredates.com. Today we're going to be talking about injectable SARMs, in particular LGD-4033. So there's been a bit of hype lately behind the injectable preparations of SARMs coming out, and people making a lot of bold claims about them, and obviously piques my interest as somebody who's been researching SARMs for upwards of half a decade at this point. And I will be doing what I presume to be the first injectable SARMs log on YouTube, whereby I actually run it properly. And by that I mean no confounding variables. The problem with a lot of people who are using this stuff is they're using it with bases of testosterone, which is fine. Obviously you need a physiologic amount of estrogen to mediate neuroprotection, avoid cardiotoxicity and such. But the thing is when if you have a base of like 200 milligrams of testosterone, using that in conjunction with the injectable SARMs, if you get results when you start bumping your calorie intake up, how much can you actually quantify as from the SARM? You know what I mean? So it's like trying to assess the anabolic activity in relative to other factors. I guess, it can be done for sure if you actually have a very established baseline therapeutic level of HRT that you've used for, upwards of a year straight with no changes in anything. And then you add this in. But if, the majority of people that I've seen, they have a million factors going all over the place. They blast this, they blast that. Their TRT is like, they're literally on a mini cycle on their TRT anyways. And then they add this in, and it's like, I don't really know how you can quantify how potent something like this is when there are so many factors, interfering. And I would not count a baseline of like a 2000 nanogram test level as something that like isn't an interfering factor. You know what I mean? Now, like with that being said, obviously there's value in those logs. It's just from my perspective, first of all, the main thing that attracts me to SARMs in particular is their relative lack of androgenicity. In a hair loss context, obviously that's a lot less important to certain people. In addition, the potential lack of cardiovascular stress due to its tissue selective properties. There are a lot of things about SARMs that really intrigue me and go outside just the realm of, potential therapeutic applications of what they're being developed for. Like I see a lot of use potentially as, well, I've delved into this in the past. I don't really want to go into too much detail. It's going to get too off track, but basically I want to assess the actual potential of something like this with no factors interfering. So as you know, I've been on a, physiologic base of hormone replacement therapy for a while now. If you've seen my blood work, you've seen my blood work on 100 milligrams of TRT per week. You'll also know that I did a Nandrolone only HRT, alternative. So I have like a several year reference point of blood work with literally no factors changed, with perfect diet and training, doing 100 milligrams of test. I also have the exact same thing now for a therapeutic amount of Nandrolone, doing Nandrolone only with exogenous estradiol. I have reference blood work for that, and I can also assess, exactly how much muscle I retain on both the testosterone and the Nandrolone. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a physiologic in terms of like a clinical dose. With that being said, there is no clinical dose for an injectable SARM. And in fact, if you have 100% bioavailability through an injectable preparation, the therapeutic dose is now completely out the window at that point, because if you can't really compare like a 2 to 3 milligram injectable dose to a 2 to 3 milligram oral dose that doesn't achieve full bioavailability, obviously. So that was poorly worded on my part, but basically a pretty close to clinical level of what would be, this, in my opinion, just, ballpark in terms of what could potentially replicate therapeutic anabolism of TRT or, some other base androgen. So my hormones are shut down, obviously, because of TRT. as well as nandrolone, as well as, like I'm literally letting the hormone clear my system and then introducing this with no confounding factors. There's going to be no base of testosterone. There's going to be no base of 4-andro. There's going to be no base of anything. There's going to be no ment. There's going to be no nandrolone. There's going to be nothing that can mediate estrogen receptor activation. Nothing that can aromatize into estrogen, nothing that can create, metabolites that are like methyl estradiol or anything like that. No dianabol, no EQ, no nothing. There is no base. My base, in order to have no interfering factors, is transdermal estrogel, which, if you know, I've already outlined in my previous videos, this is kind of like how I establish a therapeutic level of E2 in the absence of forcing myself to have to use exogenous anabolics in order to create that. So I could either use a test base, obviously, which is like the actual smart option, which I would be doing if it weren't for this experiment in particular. I could also use probably DHEA, force my estrogen up through that. I could probably use HCG. There's a lot of things I could do, but the problem is, it's not necessarily a problem, but the problem with my experiment is that it's going to skew my findings by spiking androgenicity in the body and my androgen levels. So I'm trying to, establish, is this, hair safe? Is it going to replicate the exact same anabolism of TRT with, a complete absence of androgenicity with, one whatever, like, percentile of that androgenicity? Like, what's going to happen exactly what does it do in the body in terms of, is my strength going to go up? Is it going to go down? Is it going to stay the same? Am I going to gain muscle in the absence of a hormone base now? And, using this, I don't want to have some sort of variable that's going to screw things up. So I'm just like, biting the bullet in terms of potentially risking losing muscle tissue here and potentially, putting myself in a compromised position for a short acute period of time with no androgens, essentially. So I have my exogenous estrogel can keep my estradiol levels around 20 to 30 picograms per milliliter with relative ease. And in addition to that, it skips the first pass, much like, the injectable preparations of SARMs. The enticing attribute of them, aside from 100% bioavailability relative to the oral, is they skip the first pass in the body. So there is less organ stress and less other factors that are mediated through this first pass that can cause additional stress and impair your biomarkers to a significant extent that may otherwise be averted entirely, potentially. So that's also what I want to assess. I want to see what my blood work looks like after this stuff. I want to see what it changes relative to what is actually a therapeutic HRT base. But how can you assess the anabolism of something like this without sufficient estradiol? If you just use SARMs on their own and you're shut down or severely suppressed, you're going to have low estrogen. Therefore, you're going to have hindered growth outcomes just as a result of that lack of sufficient estrogen. So it's not, a lot of compounds aren't actually that bad at building muscle in terms of nitrogen retention and literally just accrual of new lean tissue. A lot of compounds are actually that are seen as weak are actually just as good as other bulking compounds. The only thing that really differs is their side effect profile. And a lot of times the side effect profile is what brings on this, false interpretation that the compound's more effective, like D-bol or nandrolone or something like that. When you actually look at nitrogen retention, a lot of these compounds are, more or less the same. It's just the way that they act on other pathways in the body that mediate additional growth and could still be accomplished by fulfilling those mechanisms via other means. And by that, what that mumbo jumbo means basically is, if you use like a DHT derivative only to try and bulk, you're very dry. So you're going to have hindered outcomes. If you have low estrogen levels, you're going to have hindered IGF-1 production. You're going to have hindered all the growth factors that come as a result of that pathway because of that lack of sufficient estrogen. Like, honestly, when it comes to anabolism, the higher your estrogen is, typically the better in most cases, up until it's, too much and you have estrogenic side effects, obviously. So, when people are assessing SARMs, a lot of them, they have crashed E2 levels, they have, crushed endogenous androgen production, and it's impossible to assess the efficacy of something if you don't have that same pathway fulfilled. So like trying to compare, is testosterone stronger than X SARM when X SARM crushes your E2 levels into the ground, and then you're going to have a much more difficult time growing with any compound if your E2's in the ground. So I'm trying to like put it on an equal playing field to other androgens in order to see what it can actually do in a performance context when other factors that would hinder its, potential essentially are still fulfilled. So that is going to be mediated through the transdermal estrogel, which in terms of having a favorable estrone to estradiol ratio, the only way you're going to achieve that through exogenous means is with transdermal or estradiol injections. And as far as predictable pharmacokinetics, as of now, I'm more comfortable with the transdermal, and I actually have experience with it and reference blood work I can use from the past. So that's what I'm going to be doing for this. And yeah, this is kind of just my introduction to the log, see what the stuff, if it's actually worthwhile, potential novel alternative to certain androgens that may have, similar muscle building properties in terms of what their potential is for building muscle, but with a relative lack of androgenicity, and potentially other things that are going to hinder your health in the long run when it comes to anabolic androgenic steroids. Like, this, the whole point of SARMs and their, the progression of their development is to try and phase out steroids. So this is, a worthwhile experiment in my opinion. I don't know anyone who's going to try it properly and risk their physique essentially deteriorating in order to try it properly. So I am going to give it a go, and I will keep you guys posted how that goes. And then I'm going to, if it goes well, I'm going to get blood work and then put that, par for par against my TRT blood work, as well as my nandrolone only blood work, against any blood work I have that's relevant to this situation in terms of determining what is a, what I would potentially consider a more tissue selective alternative for muscle mass accrual, potentially as like a adjunct addition to TRT. Like, there's a million applications for this, but just to show you guys exactly what's going on in the body, like, this is the only way I'm going to be able to get accurate results. So anyways, as far as the dose I'm going to be using, probably should cover that earlier instead of at the 15-minute mark or whatever this video ends up being once I chop it down, if I chop it down at all, is 3 milligrams per day. And the pharmacokinetics of this suspension, this oil-based solution, I honestly am just guessing what it is. So we know the oral is 24 to 36 hours. Is it similar purportedly, but is that proven through clinical data? No, it's not at all. This is all just anecdotal guessing at the end of the day, looking at data of other like oral anabolic agents relative to their oil-based counterparts and comparing their half-lives and kind of just guessing as far as what I know, although I've been told by the manufacturer it's quite at least ballpark accurate. So there may be a cumulative effect in terms of blood serum concentrations because of this half-life. So, maybe I might have to take it a notch back from every day, or lower the dose or something like that, but we'll see. I don't know. Like, honestly, it's kind of uncharted waters, but as anecdotally, people seem to have good results, but it's all in a bodybuilding context for gaining as much muscle as possible. I haven't seen anything in terms of like very, very specific before and afters of blood work of like no factors change. Like, this was on like an actual therapeutic amount of tests with the same diet, the same training regimen, with the exact same diet again, and the same training regimen. And all that was changed is now there's this injectable SARM here in lieu of X androgen, with your estradiol still where it should be. And then assessing, muscle outcomes through that, as well as biomarkers and whatnot. So we'll see how that goes. Anyways, I've kind of rambled on a bit much about that. So I'll keep you guys posted. Talk to you guys soon.